What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Moving Mindset powered by Station Athletics. I'm Chris Hardenberg here today with Nast Whitson. Nast was on the podcast a little while back. We talked specifically about pregnant women and training with pregnant women because that was a suggested topic we got.
Yeah.
Another suggested topic we got was to talk about training as it pertains to aging.
Yeah.
So as we age, what's your training look like? And Joe and I did a podcast a while back on
Yeah.
like training if you're a master's athlete.
Mm-hmm.
But we were like, all right, let's revisit this topic. And then we wanted to segue also into things like what happens to your body in general with aging, and then specifically tailor that to women going through perimenopause or menopause. Because that was a suggested topic we got from you as well as some others. Like we had, I don't remember everyone, but it was like 2 or 3 people I got like, hey, can we talk about this? And it's like, okay.
Tell.
Yeah, well, listen, we have a gym in our network that's all women, right? And I would venture to say most of our membership, if we were to exclude that gym, because that's 100% women, but
Yes.
if we were to exclude that gym and look at the rest of our co-ed gyms, I would say our membership like leans female. And so it's an understandable thing to have that as a topic. So
Yeah.
let's start first talking about aging.
Yeah.
Let's go over aging, what happens to the body, what our training should look like, and then tailor that specifically to perimenopause and menopause. So let's start with aging. What happens to the body?
Yeah. Well, I love this topic because I think a lot of us are all of us are going to go through this at some point.
We all age
We all
as
age.
much as we hate it.
It's so interesting. It's like one day we're young and limber and we don't have to warm up for anything. And then another day you're like, oh, there's my knee. There's my shoulder. I know I have it, but yeah, so it's so interesting like if you're active or even not active, you're going to feel the effects of aging, right? And so things just start to slow down
Mhm.
in terms of recovery. So we talk a lot about like, you know, we can talk about bone density, we can talk about muscle mass, so on and so forth, but it's all ropping. It's literally, that's like such a sad visual.
We're all decaying.
And it is, in a sense, decay,
Yeah.
right? Things are slowing down. We're not able to keep up with making, certain cells and muscle and joints and collagen and all the things. Everything is declining. But what we really want to focus on is how do we slow that process down? Is how do we recover? What do we do to help our bodies, fight against gravity? Because gravity is always working. In a sense, I don't want to say against us, but in a way it is, right? So what are we doing to combat all of that decline,
Right.
essentially? Um, Strength training, nutrition, sleep, diet, watching our stress, like stress management, stuff like that.
So when it comes to aging, right,
Yeah.
what are some hallmarks? So I'll say this: unfortunate biological hallmarks. So
Yeah.
one of them, right, might be joint stiffening, muscle loss, um, adverse effects that comes with increased stress. Because
Yeah.
some of that increased stress. I hate. We just filmed a podcast not too long ago on stress and stress management.
Yes. That
But
was a
with
good one.
but with that being said, let's just be real. Like I have more responsibilities at 35 than I did at 21.
100%.
And so
Yeah.
some of that is just going to come with more stress. I have,
Mhm.
I have 2 people that 3, I guess, but 2 really that I'm responsible to keep alive, right?
Yes.
Like, so there's things that come with that.
Yeah.
So talk maybe a little bit on some of the physiological things that people might experience as they age.
So yeah, you said it. It's just joints. Our joints start to hurt. Really, the biggest thing that's happening is inflammation of the body, and that can come in so many different ways. That can come. We already talked about it from stress. That can come from being active. That can come from work. That can come from life. What we're finding is that blood flow is starting to be restricted in certain areas. We're sitting for long periods of time throughout the day. There is actually something called the sitting disease. Um, Interestingly enough, I was reading some content years ago. I used to work at a high school, and total side note, I was starting to experience like strange sciatica issues.
Okay.
I mean, I had an injury from sports in college, but it was gone. It was gone for a while, and all of a sudden it started coming back. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, could it be that I'm just sitting all day,
Right.
losing blood flow, losing circulation, not as active? um, Fat storage, cortisol does not help with, um, losing fat, all that stuff. It's just cortisol. I know I'm trying not to touch on that, but it's just it's related to stress. It's a hormone, right?
Right.
So we talk a lot about that. But in terms of like joints, muscle, bone density, all of that stuff just really starts to decline in a major way. I think one of the things that I love this topic because I don't feel like our society has embraced it just yet. I almost,
Sure.
in a way, it has because we're trying to figure out ways to not age, right? So
Yeah.
there's like a ton of like fads and pills and lotions, right? Nobody wants a wrinkle. Um, but there's just so much out there to prevent aging, right? Even though it's such a natural part of life. So how do we embrace that? Like at some point we have to embrace the fact that we are going to have um, less muscle mass.
Right.
At some point, we have to embrace the fact that our joints are just not going to be as strong. So I think the question might be instead of like what's happening, it's what are we doing about it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think one of the ways people can embrace that is, and this is a really good segue, uh, one of the ways they can embrace it is adjusting how they go about their training, right?
Yeah.
Um, One of the things we emphasize in our gyms, and you've emphasized once already, is weight
Mhm.
training.
Yeah.
I just came out of an interview not that long ago with a woman named Miriam Verga, who's a member at our Westfield location, and she talked about how her muscles are significantly stronger,
Yeah.
but she was experiencing symptoms of osteopenia already and some osteoporosis, and it was like
Yeah.
she's like, "I'm in my 50s." So
Mhm.
she started weight training, we'll get to it in a little bit, incorporated some hormone therapy, and it's
Yeah.
like she saw huge increases in her bone density, and so weight training is huge, and when we say weight training, guys, we mean, like, actual
Excuse me.
weight training, not like some of these programs that are like, "Oh, yeah, we weight train," and they don't have a weight in the building higher than 15 or 20 pounds.
Right. Right. That's
It's
important.
yeah, it's actually like pushing your body to lift something that's relatively heavy for you.
Yes.
So that's one way we can do it. But, like we talked about on our podcast related to masters athletes, there's things
Mhm.
that like when we're younger, listen, aspects of like recovery are always important. But
Mhm.
let's be real, like I can get away or you could get away with way more than we were when we were 21, than we could when we're 31, than we can if we're 41, right?
Mhm.
It's just a
Mhm.
reality. So
Yeah.
maybe speak on what someone's training should look like and how that relates to like what we do in class.
That was a great podcast. She did such a great job explaining like what she's going through, what she's experiencing. Shout out to you, Miriam. Um, because you know what? Sometimes we talk about like what the solution is, but we don't always talk about what we're feeling, what we're sensing. Nobody wants to hear, well, this hurts and this hurts and this hurts. And then sometimes people think you're crazy and you're not crazy. It's just you might need to change something. And one of the first things, especially as we age, is weight training.
Yeah.
I can't even stress that enough. So I would suggest coming in 2 to 3 times a week. First of all, find a gym. Station is a great gym, Station
Yeah, let's
Athletics.
go.
Let's go. Um, Find yourself a gym and then also find yourself some quality trainers that understand weight training. You want to do it at least 2 to 3 times a week. And what's interesting about weight training, it's not I think people are starting to do like more high intensity plus weight training. The problem with that is that it's still cardio, it's still aerobic.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we start to get more towards absolute strength,
Mhm.
more towards hypertrophy, more towards short intervals or short repetitions, I should say, with higher load. Okay. So if you're someone that normally does, um, Like I have a couple friends and a couple family members. I'm not gonna call them out, but they love their 5-pound weights. And can you do a lot with 5 pounds? Yes,
Yeah, sure.
absolutely, if we add tempo. That's another one. Let's remember that, tempo.
You got it.
But we wanna up that weight. Let's try 10 pounds. Let's try 12 pounds. Ooh, 12 pounds. All right. But, weight is relative to the person. We wanna challenge you. We wanna push the envelope a little bit with weight training. Do shorter repetitions, higher rest. We also wanna do that 2 to 3 times a week, like I mentioned. The other thing I just mentioned is tempo. Tempo work is huge. So we wanna think about the way down that's called eccentric. So eccentric loading, we want to go slowly. So, for example, if you're squatting, slow it down, right? Instead of just constantly doing high intensity all the time, perhaps think about 3 seconds down. So, down, two, three, hold at the bottom, jump up at the top. Tempo work is also really, really important. Now, I'm not saying get rid of the cardio. I love cardio.
Oh, do I
I
ever.
love running. I That's my jam. That was my first love. Um, Cardio is aerobic capacity, increasing aerobic capacity is huge. Sometimes though, when we go into aerobic capacity, we are literally killing ourselves. We're going to the point of exhaustion too often. And what that's going to do, as we talked about cortisol, it's going to raise our cortisol levels.
Yep.
So instead of using it as a form of, excuse me, increasing our endurance, increasing our cardiovascular system and improving that system, we're literally draining ourselves.
Mhm.
And so finding that healthy medium of, I would suggest, this is interesting. So with some of my clients, 20s, maybe even 30s, I would say, 3 days of cardio-esque high intensity interval training, and say 2 days of strength training. As we age, I would actually flip-flop that. I would do 3 days of strength training and 2 days of cardio. And make it like a true cardio day, aerobic day, and make it a true strength day. Sometimes I separate the two because I find, like I said, we're just meshing it into one.
Mhm.
And like one of my clients, she's in her mid 50s. She was basically like, I'm not seeing any results. I said, well, we could be experiencing some hormone changes for sure. You could be right at the door of menopause, but at the same time, it's what is your workout? What does your fitness look like? And she was telling me that she goes to the gym 5 days a week, and she does a little bit of strength. Well, she warms up. She does a little bit of strength and I said, well, how much is the weight? Well, 5 to 15 pounds and a whole bunch of cardio.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, sometimes I use dumbbells in my cardio as well. I'm like, I understand that, like high rep, right? High repetitions, high volume, low weights. Let's really get on those weights.
Yeah.
So,
And that
yeah.
kinda touches on again, we did another episode on
Excuse me.
how just doing long cardio is not helping you lose weight.
Mhm.
Now when it comes to the longevity, so let's put away weight loss for a second because we're talking about aging and longevity.
Yeah.
Um, 2 of the biggest markers when it comes to longevity is, grip strength or just
Mhm.
strength in general. Grip strength is just a way to measure it. I've
Yeah.
also heard lower body strength.
Mhm.
So but we'll use what the study said to me, which was grip strength and
Yeah.
VO2 max.
Yes.
And so
Mhm.
grip strength basically is lifting weights,
Mhm.
VO2 max is cardio.
Yeah.
And so what we find is most people err to the side of the cardio for a couple reasons. One, it it's the it has a lower barrier of entry.
100%.
You
Yeah.
don't, oh, I need to lose weight. I don't feel good. I need to get into shape. I'm going to go for a run.
Go outside.
Really easy,
Mhm.
right? Or you have or I don't know anything, right? I don't know anything about any form of weight training, but even if I don't run right, I know
Mhm.
what the act of running is. So I might as well
Yes.
just go do that.
Yes. Even though
Because
there's a standard to running.
right, right.
Just
So
so you know.
so that's one reason why. The other reason why is like if I just go in and lift weights
Mhm.
and with long rest
Yep.
and it's like there a lot of people who are newer to fitness walk out feeling like they didn't do anything. And it's like, I need to like punish myself in order to get
Yeah.
results. And the biggest way to feel like I've punished myself is to be breathing really heavy, laying on the floor, sweating a lot. And it's like, that's not necessarily the answer. And so for people who are aging and maybe, are 40 plus, let's just say, just using that as a barometer,
Yeah. Yeah.
in our classes, to kind of speak to what you're saying too, most of them are coming in 3 days a week anyways,
Yes.
which
Yep.
is
Which
fine,
is great.
which is great. But that's why we emphasize in our classes, like, we lift weights,
Mhm.
and we wanna do it at relatively high loads, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna look different for every person.
100%.
But if I'm someone who's older, and let's say, like, we're in Denville right now, and the
Mhm.
workout today is 5 by 2 back squat, right?
I noticed that,
Maybe
yeah.
if I'm 42 and experiencing some of the symptoms you talked about, maybe there's no tempo prescribed, but maybe I just
Yeah.
add one in. You know what I mean? Like, okay,
Mhm.
hey, for this cycle, it's back squats because we let every member know what's coming.
Yep.
And if my joints are a little achy, maybe I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to go slower on the way down. Like, I don't have to maybe count 3 seconds on the way down, but I'm just going to really slow and
Yeah.
controlled on the way down. And so that adds in the tempo you talked about. So that's like an adjustment
100%.
I can make on the fly. The other thing is, don't shy away from the sprint workouts. I
Mhm.
saw a stat somewhere,
Go
and yeah,
fast.
I don't remember the exact
Yeah.
statistic, so bear with me guys, but I want to say it was like 75-80% of people over the age of 30 never sprint again.
I think it's higher,
Yeah.
actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's higher.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
it's like so much comes with sprinting because you get physiologically a
Mhm.
similar muscular response you do to
Yes.
lifting weights
Mhm.
because it is explosive and it's fast, which is the same type of fast twitch muscle fibers you use while you lift weights.
Correct. Yes.
And so it's like when you see that sprint workout in class, a lot of people are tempted to be like, ugh, like I got so much rest. Like, what am I going to get out of
Oh,
this?
yeah.
And it's like, if
Or that
you,
only lasted 5 minutes, and
yeah,
I'm like, "Exactly."
yeah, and so it's like, don't shy away from that. Talk to your coaches to learn what it means to go fast. Jay just got something to say.
I got the stat. It's
Okay, let's go.
it is estimated that a very small percentage of people over the age of 30 sprint regularly. One estimate suggests that only 1 to 5% of people over 30 sprint at all.
Oh my gosh, 1 to
That's
5%?
crazy.
At all. Not even like regularly, just like sprint in general. Like
That's crazy.
That's insane.
And that's
That.
something that's, like, regular to human life. Like, if any of you
Mhm.
have had kids, like, they sprint all the time.
All the time.
And so it's
And they
like,
jump, and they
yes,
squat,
yes.
and they try to pick heavy things up.
Well, same thing with, like, jump training, you get a very
Correct.
similar response as well as weight training. So that's why, like, we jump on boxes and stuff like that,
100%. Yes.
and why, like, when we scale, we went through this whole thing where most gyms who do our style of training or CrossFit style gyms,
Yeah.
when someone can't jump, they'll do box step ups, right? When in
Yeah.
reality, you should probably still be jumping,
Yes. I
but,
was
like,
just gonna say that.
even if
Mhm.
you're jumping on a 10-pound plate, you're or a
Or just on the
15-pound,
ground.
exactly, you get a
Mhm.
different response muscularly
It's a different
with your
stimulus.
bones than you do
Mhm.
stepping up. And so that's why
Yep.
it's like we went through this whole change as a company where we're like, no, guys, we should be scaling jumping with jumping. Just make it way lower. Now,
Yes.
do you get the person who's 68 and actually shouldn't be jumping? Yeah, of course. So let's start somewhere and then
Yeah.
move
Yeah.
to it. But that's why you could do like fast step ups on this on the plate.
100%. There's so many variations. I think that's one of the things I love about our gyms is that there's just so much
Yeah.
variation. And if you're not able to jump, like you said, jump on a box or jump on a plate, I mean, you could hold on to a set of rings and, use your arms or use the rig or use whatever it is to get that similar stimulus that we want to try and keep the stimulus as much as possible.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things a lot of times when something is hard, coaches have a tendency to just get rid of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, 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 we're not going to get rid of it. We're going to find a variation that you're able to do. We're going to meet you where you're at. And that part is super, super important. Um, I want to backtrack real quick. So you were talking about just looking at the board is right over here.
Yeah.
So today they have back squat, 15-minute time cap, 5 by 2. So one of the things I love, and then they have an AMRAP, as many rounds as possible for 14 minutes right afterwards, is that there's quality time to work on the strength here. And 5 by 2, most people would look at that and be like, 2 reps? What is that?
Yes.
What is that going to do? And it's building. We're building to a heavy set of 2. Um, if we can't, if we're not, we don't always have to go slow, right?
Sure.
Sometimes it's great. You were talking about speed and going fast. We could add other variations there. We could add a box, right? A governor. So someone with bad knees, they can't go below parallel. We'll bring them to a box, right? So there's just so many things that you can do, so many options. And so anyone that has fear of coming into a gym setting, for example, like one of our gyms, just know that there are so many different varieties. There's so many different ways that you can do a similar movement. And if you've had any sort of surgeries, any issues, any sort of disease, anything that you've had in your past, most of it we can work with.
Yeah.
And if like, for example, I always say, if I don't have the answer, I have really smart friends. I can call them up and we can collaboratively think of something that you are able to do to get your fitness going. So I get excited about seeing that the 5x2 back squat. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yes, just because it's short reps does not mean that it's not difficult.
Yeah.
And just because it's a short window for fitness. So I think a lot of us are, you know what, it makes sense. A lot of us are addicted to long workouts.
Mhm.
I mean, it releases endorphins. We get excited. There is something to be said, like different, like serotonin, like all these hormones are released when we get into a long flow. But we want to work in all energy systems, right? So phospholytic, glycolytic, aerobic, anaerobic, all those things. We want to work in different planes of motion and different energy systems. And we want to make sure that we are consistently doing that. Once we stop, we start to see atrophy, slowing down, joint health, all that stuff we talked about earlier, muscle health, bone density. It starts to decline in a massive way. So, weight training with higher load, shorter reps, and sprint work is so huge.
Yeah.
I'm a jumps and sprints coach for track and field, and it's so interesting. One of the ways that we encourage people to get stronger, a lot of people think we're just doing some of these jumping drills and barefoot drills just because we want them to jump farther, higher. Yes, that is the case. But what I know is that there's longevity in that.
Sure.
I know these guys were going to protect their knees, protect their ankles or Achilles, or a lot of people with plantar fasciitis start jumping.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Without shoes. Start doing balance work without shoes, jumping without shoes, just like a little plug for no shoes, I guess. But really, it's just jumping.
Yeah.
It's so good for our system and our nervous system as well.
Yeah. And so to boil it down, guys, I would say lift weights at a
Correct.
relatively heavy weight, uh, control tempo if needed,
Yep.
go fast, sprint,
Yeah. Go
right?
fast.
Don't shy away from that. Learn how to go fast,
Yeah.
and take recovery seriously. And what that might look like is nutrition, sleep, because recovery is a big umbrella term, right?
Huge.
Nutrition,
Yes.
sleep, but even to the effect of like, I hate to say it, but maybe you don't work out 5 days a week as you get older. Maybe you do
That's it
three,
right there.
maybe you do 3 or 4, because when you're younger, you could work out 3, 4, 4, 5, 6 days a week
Hmm.
and recover in time for the next workout. But maybe if you hit a workout, depending on what it is, right?
Yep.
That it's like, oh, I need a whole day to actually recover to then hit it
100%.
hard again. So those are some of the things I would recommend. Now,
Hmm.
when it comes to aging, one topic specifically that was brought up that Nast is, in my opinion, uniquely positioned to talk on, especially way more than me, is menopause and perimenopause.
Dun,
Now,
dun, dun.
yeah, now there's a lot going on with women in these times. So what I'd like to touch on is what is going on
Yeah.
and some of the things we could do to help combat or navigate some of what's going on.
Yes. So, do you have 5 days, 10 days to talk about perimenopause?
We got like a half an hour.
No. Yeah, this topic is coming up more and more and more. But what's crazy, I just read this stat that the word perimenopause did not come into play, according to New York Times, until 1997. They didn't print it until 1997. So it's a fairly new term. And another ridiculous stat is something like, um, what was it? Only like 34% of the population knows that they're in perimenopause or knows about perimenopause, but they don't know about it. I could be wrong with those numbers, but it's something ridiculous. Like so many people don't know what perimenopause is and that they're in perimenopause. So let's talk about it. Perimenopause is the stage that happens before menopause. Um, let's define menopause. Menopause is when you go a full year, 12 months without a cycle.
Hmm.
If during those 12 months you get your cycle, you start over. It's not menopause yet. Technically, according to some experts, menopause only lasts 1 day. It's day 366 of not having a cycle. So if you've gone 365 days without a cycle, it's the next day. And it's technically 1 day. So everything before that is perimenopause. Everything after that is postmenopause. Now, the question I would be asking, like, okay, what what am I experiencing at perimenopause and how long does it last? Um, I don't want to say this in the mic. It could last 5 to 10 years, guys.
Oh.
Ugh. I'm just gonna go cry in a corner. 5 to 10 years. For some women, it starts in their mid-30s. This is perimenopause we're talking about, and for some in their early 40s. And it's when we start to experience a decline in hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Um, and so, yeah, we experience a lot of different kinds of symptoms. Symptoms like, I would say one of the most common symptoms that I hear about is an irregular period. So if, you're someone who tracks your period, I'm going to make a plug for please track your cycle. Ladies, if you have not already, your cycle is very telling. And if you're tracking it, you can learn so much from it. Um, and you can have more empathy for yourself as well. I'll explain why later. But tracking your cycle, the cycle starts to be erratic. So, for example, if you're someone that normally gets your menstruation, say on day 28, all of a sudden in perimenopause, maybe you'll get it on day 24. Say you get it on day 32. Say it goes back to day 28. It's just very erratic. And that's usually the first symptom that women notice is their cycle is just all over the place.
Mm.
Some other symptoms include joint pain. So I have a friend who she had shoulder surgery. She's a long time athlete and she had surgery years ago, did PT, felt amazing. Was coming back to the gym, felt great, lifting. She's an amazing, super strong lifter. And all of a sudden, this shoulder started to hurt again, as if she had just re-injured it. But upon scans and MRIs, there was nothing torn. There was nothing
Interesting.
going on. And so I asked her, I said, do you think this is menopausal symptoms? And she was like, I hadn't really thought of that. So she went, got herself tested, come to find they recommended hormone replacement therapy and the pain went away
So interesting.
literally within like 6 or 7 days.
Wow.
Now, it doesn't work like that for everybody, but joint pain, like hip pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, those are all symptoms. For some women, vaginal dryness, something called dyspareunia, which is painful sex, sleepless nights. So, sleep is a huge one that's disrupted. Anxiety is a really big one. There's weight gain.
Okay.
That's another massive one. So a lot of times, like lately, we've been having more and more clients coming in and saying, "Hey, I work out 5 times a week. I'm not sleeping well. How do I get rid of this that's going on here?" So there's a lot more, but I would say those are some of the major ones that we're hearing about right now.
Okay. So that all sounds great. Sounds like a
Just wanna
really good,
throw this
really,
mic.
yeah, really good time. And all the women are listening to me like, shut up, Chris. So yeah, that doesn't sound like fun. So
Wow.
what do we do? Is it just like, all right, ladies, you know what? Sucks to suck, like just suck it up and deal with it? Or like it's like, no, there's things we can do to help manage it or get or do better with it. Like what do we do about it?
Well, I would say, well, first off, I want to backtrack for a second. Perimenopause is a part of life. I know we're giving it a really negative
Well, I would
spin
assume
here.
both it's just a part of life in general.
It is just it's a part of life that all women are gonna go through.
Yeah.
Currently, I saw the stat, 75 million women in the United States are, perimenopausal, menopausal right now. 75 million. So why aren't we talking about this more? We are. We are.
We are. We're talking about it
um,
quite a bit.
but yeah, there are aspects to it. It's almost like when we talk about our menstrual cycle, right? We're like, oh, on our period again. But it is something that we can work towards recognizing and embracing. Um, and there are so many things that we can do in order to do that, especially if you know some of the symptoms, if you go and see your practitioner, if you start asking questions like, why am I feeling like anxiety all of a sudden? I've been kind of nasty to my friends. Why is that? Why am I so short with my husband? I will say so many marriages fall apart during this time. And a lot of people say it's because they didn't recognize that they were in perimenopause at the
Right.
time. Neither partner knew about these symptoms. And so it's important not just for um, wives to be educated, but husbands as well to understand like, hey, my partner's definitely going through something. How can I support her? How can I encourage her to go see her practitioner? And we have questions. Get those questions answered. You don't have to go through this alone. I would say that's like, if that's the message right here, is you don't have to go through this alone. So when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I think I'm perimenopausal, the first thing I do is, and I got this from this amazing journalist named Tamsin. Actually, plug for her. It's a great book. I
What's the
got
name of the book?
it's called How to Menopause by Tamsin Fadal,
Okay.
and she it's a forward by Lisa Mosconi, PhD. But I got to meet her like 2 months ago at a banquet and that I got invited to. It was a perimenopause menopause banquet, and I'm not there yet. At least I don't think I am. But I have a lot of friends that are. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go because I was on a group text, and literally the night before, a bunch of my friends who were going through perimenopause were all having hot flashes. That's another one. Temperature dysregulation. They were all having a hot flash. I was like,
What a group
how
text.
do I respond to this? I'm like, hey guys, I'm going to a banquet tomorrow on perimenopause, menopause. What do you want me to ask? And they were like, it was a lot of four-letter words.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, um, but the biggest thing was what can we do? Who can we go see? What are our resources? And Tamsin said, she goes, and then some other doctors say it too, like Dr. Mary Claire Haver talks about listen to a woman and believe her when she tells you she's having symptoms.
Okay.
And I love that. The first thing is find someone that's going to listen to you because something like over 70% of women go see a practitioner and they don't believe her. That is crazy. And I'm one of those people. I've actually had my own struggles with things and I'm on practitioner number 4 and I'm in this field,
Wow.
which is kind of crazy. So when someone doesn't listen to you and doesn't believe what you're saying about your own body, it's really disheartening.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you keep going, but one of the things Miriam said in her interview was, her daughters, because she has, I think she said 4 daughters. I might have
Amazing.
misheard that.
Yeah.
She said 4, right? So, she was like, my daughters were like, "You're" be to use her words, "Are acting like you hate us, and we know you don't hate us, so go see a doctor." So, she was like, "You know what?
Oh.
They're right. I've been really short and ornery lately, and I don't know why." But she said she went to her primary care physician, and she's like, "I didn't get any great advice or feedback on what I had going on, and it wasn't until I went and saw, like, a hormone therapist." I don't know if it was an endocrinologist, but, like,
Yeah.
someone in that field that she was like, they recommended hormone therapy and kinda got into some of that stuff, but it was like her first thing was primary care, and that she didn't get into what the conversation was,
Yeah.
but all she said was that she didn't get great advice, and so that kinda speaks to what you're saying. It's like, I'm going to my doctor, whether they don't believe me or they're not giving me great advice. Most people, I hate to say it, are not like Miriam's a go-getter.
Yeah.
So she's
Yeah.
like, "This is not right, I'm gonna find answers." But a lot of people are gonna go to their primary care, get a poor answer, and be like, "Well, I guess this is
Like,
the way it
all
is."
right, this is it. This is
Yeah.
where I'm at.
Yeah.
I think in that same conversation, and in the defense of doctors, they don't uh, think about what they go through in medical school,
Right.
right? And so this is just me listening to Dr. Amy Shaw and Dr. I think I'm saying it correct. And I already mentioned Mary Claire Haver. They were on the Mel Robbins podcast, actually, and they talked a lot about um, obstetrics. like OB-GYNs and different doctors not going through the right kind of education. I mean, they might have like a day on it, perimenopause and menopause. But if a third of our life is spent in this time frame, why why aren't we studying this more?
Right.
A third of our life, the majority of our lives can be in this phase. And so finding a practitioner that cares, I mean, that can be difficult, right? There are some websites like the Menopause Society. I think it's like menopause.org, or I could be mistaken, but the Menopause Society has a list of different practitioners that women can look for that are willing to listen to you,
Sure.
right? And understand like what are your symptoms, what's going on. And they're not always just going to recommend um, antidepressants. They're not just going to recommend the birth control pill, right? Um, a lot of times, so this is something, a trend that I've been hearing is a lot of women are going to their practitioner and they're experiencing brain fog. They're experiencing anxiety. They're sad. They're happy. They're sad. They're happy. They're sad. They're mad. They hate people. So a lot of practitioners are like, well, we didn't really study this, but I know a drug, an antidepressant that can help you. Oftentimes, if we just tested her estrogen levels,
Right.
her estrogen has dropped. Estrogen is protective, right? Why aren't we looking into hormone replacement, right? When I know I'm jumping the gun here, but when the long term effects of that are so much more beneficial than the antidepressants. Now, I'm not saying there are some mental health specialists for this as well. I have it in my notes somewhere, but I'm not saying that antidepressants should be thrown out the window. Not at all. Some women actually do need that. But if you've never been on it and then all of a sudden you're going through perimenopausal symptoms and that's the first thing they put you on and it's not fully alleviating, it's almost like dumbing you down to life and it's not getting to the root cause, which is hormonal, that I have a problem with that.
Well, I even hear you saying is like there's nothing like that. Some of those drugs might be like, okay, hey, that might be what you need, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
But step one should probably be taking blood work because it's like, oh,
absolutely.
your symptoms map to this condition. Your age maps to an age that
Hmm.
this condition might be the case,
Yeah,
but we don't know for sure until we take your hormone levels. So let's get your blood work taken, see where your hormone levels are at. And if they're normal, then it's
correct.
like, okay, something else is going on here. But if
Yeah,
they're not, well, not normal, right? To what like a younger woman might be experiencing, or
yeah,
they're at a level that it's like, that is perimenopause, then things like hormone therapy can be a good treatment. And listen, we talked a bunch before we got on the mic, so we could just go there.
yeah.
um, a lot of people, and myself included at various points, were like, against hormone therapy, right?
Hmm.
Knowing very little about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is based around one study.
Hmm.
So why don't you touch on that study and why it's since been debunked?
Yeah. So there was a study done years ago. Um, and essentially, it was studying if hormone replacement therapy is effective for women in menopause. And basically, and I'm just going to say the very gist of it, it caused a lot of fear because it suggested that women who go on hormone replacement therapy are at a very high risk of getting breast cancer. Um, and for years, practitioners believe that, so they wouldn't necessarily recommend HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And so over the years, more studies have been done, and recently that was debunked. Now, I just have to mention real quick that women are not, I mentioned this before the podcast too, that women are it's new that we're studying women, which is crazy. It's almost like I think I said it was like 1984 was the first study, the first research done on women. And then in 1993, the FDA said, hey, we need to make sure that the trials have both men and women in it. That's crazy, you guys.
That is crazy.
Like we were alive then. That's the
That
that's
right.
that's the crazy part. Um, and a little scary. So there's so much that's unknown. There's just not a lot of research that's been done on women. But that being said, back to this HRT study, it has been debunked recently because what we're finding is that um, that study, when it was done on women that were like 62 years old and up. And the average age, I don't think we've said this yet, the average age of menopause is 51.
Right.
And then we just mentioned that perimenopause can be 5 to 10 years prior.
Right.
So, like, let's just say 35 to 51 even,
Yeah,
right?
somewhere between
Or
35 and 51, you're in
and
menopause or thank you,
perimenopause.
yes.
Yeah, and so this study was done on 62-year-olds when they're postmenopausal. At 62, well, like one of the things that happens, we already talked about estrogen being very protective. So when we're in menopause, our estrogen drops significantly. And so what that does is that leaves room for inflammation in the body. What does inflammation lead to? It leads to joint issues. It leads to disease, dis-ease of the body. It leads to an increase in a risk of cancer, increase in cardiovascular disease. So all of these things rise. So of course, if you're studying 62-year-old women, they're going to have a higher risk of cancer, a
Yeah.
higher risk of cardiovascular issues and heart disease. All of that has gone up. And so, you know, I just think I don't, it's not just what I think, it's just the study is flawed.
Yeah.
And
They didn't
so
factor in, like, the other comorbidities that could be going on.
that, and it should have been done with a larger population. So women in their 40s, 50s as well. It
Yeah.
should have included that age range. And so this is starting to be talked about now more and more, which I'm very excited about. Tamsin talks about that in her book. But now we have to change the narrative because that study really did a number on practitioners and the medical system, and it really was against women in menopause.
Yeah.
And so now we're trying to re-educate women of all ages on, hey, there is something to be said for women that are on HRT. It's very protective long term if you start it earlier. So the sooner you start hormone replacement therapy, the sooner you recognize that you have symptoms and you find a practitioner that'll listen to you, the sooner we can lower the chances of cardiovascular disease, lower the chances of Alzheimer's, lower the chances of cancers, so on and so forth. Are there people that shouldn't take hormone replacement therapy? Yeah, absolutely. Tamsin talks about it in her book. Um, I actually think I have it here. Um, yeah, people that have unexplained vaginal bleeding, liver disease, prior estrogen sensitive cancers, including breast cancer. So if you have a history of cancer, um, prior coronary heart disease, personal history, or inherited high risk of unprovoked blood clots, um, so on and so forth. So there's a lot more to it. That's on page 89. There are certain people that probably shouldn't be on there. I
Sure.
actually have met somebody, but interestingly enough, she's working with a functional medicine doctor, and they've figured out a way to help her with another form of hormone replacement
Okay.
therapy. So it's exciting for her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it reminds me of, like, I don't remember the exact you remember the study? It was done, like, in the 50s or or something like that. Uh, oh, it's like, you shouldn't squat with your knees going past your toes, right? And
Yes.
I forget the exact population the guy
Yeah.
studied, but it was, like, a really small group. It was, like, college athletes with, like, a previous like, recovering from an ACL injury. It was, like, a very niche group, and he just declared, like, hey, squatting's dangerous and your knees shouldn't go past your toes. How many high school weight rooms
Oh
have
my
you been
gosh.
in that they're like, don't let your knees go past your toes? Like, maybe not so much anymore, but I remember being younger and, like, hearing that. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Me
that was
too.
such a flawed, like, Fugazi study that everyone in strength and conditioning now knows that that's the case, like, with any level of education, right?
Right. Right.
But for some reason, it's still not as much now, but let's say 10 years ago, it was still floating around in, like, weight rooms like, "Hey, you can't
Yeah.
do that." And
Yeah.
so it reminds me of this where it's like you have this one study that's since been debunked, right? You mentioned Tamsin. I've mentioned it before. I read a book by Dr. Peter Attia
Yes. He's
who
great.
who is great because he's a fitness guy, right?
Mhm.
Who's also a practitioner. And he even said in the book he was against hormone therapy and now he's like a huge advocate for it. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, okay, people are coming around to it, but it's almost like because that study got there first, it's like still in like the vernacular and like the thought
Yeah.
process.
It gets in there.
And so, yeah, we're seeing that too, where we have to overcome some of those thought process, and it's why we're working with Optimus, and we're going to have Jeannie on here to
Yeah,
explain some of that.
excited.
And so it was cool to get the question of, on perimenopause and menopause. And, you know, uh, it was one of those things where it's like, I'm so glad I asked, because it makes my job easier to be like, okay, this is what people want to
Yes.
hear about. Um,
We want to educate, sorry to interrupt.
no, go
We
ahead.
want to educate the coaches as well. Like, our coaches are so educated. I'm very biased, but when they start noticing symptoms, it's like, hey, have you ever considered getting blood work?
Yes.
And now that is an option that our gyms are offering.
Yes.
And I'm very thankful for that, because not everyone it's not that they don't have access, they just might not know that
Yeah.
they have things available to them. And so, we're aware of these conversations. And so we're like, hey, you've been having that joint pain pretty consistently. You've gone to see someone. Have you ever considered blood work? Have you ever considered hormone therapy? And so that's one thing too, is we have to realize we have to, as professionals and trainers, we work within our scope.
Yes.
And so, but we're always recommending resources like Optimus. We're always collaborating with people in the medical industry. And that's something that is not often seen. And so it's really exciting. Like, I get like nerdy
Yeah.
excited. And also just to say, like, test, don't guess.
Yeah.
Like, don't keep guessing. If this is bothering you, you don't have to live in pain, and you don't have to do this alone.
Right. So listen, guys, we covered a lot on that podcast. So to kind of sum it down, we went over what your body's going through as your age. So that's the beginning of the podcast. If you want to go back, we talked about how you can adjust your training as you age, and then specifically for women that are perimenopausal and menopausal, things you can do in your lifestyle to work within that, and then things you can do through blood work and hormone replacement therapy in the perimenopause stage to
Yeah.
help kind of work through some of those symptoms. So
Yeah.
Nast, I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
If anyone has any specific questions, you can reach out to Nast directly. I think it's just Nast Whitson on Instagram.
Nast_Whitson.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Nast_Whitson on
Thank you.
Instagram. So you can reach out to her directly. She's been working with us for almost a year now.
Mhm.
I hope she's going to be working with us for many years to come. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to us on YouTube and Instagram. Give us a 5-star rating on the podcast platform you listen on. We'll see you at the gym.
Do it.